Hello, welcome. On behalf of Texas Monthly and the Texas Business Hall of Fame, welcome to our Facebook Live Town Hall with Richard Fisher. We are very pleased that you're joining us today. First off, I want to thank our sponsors, who are Texas Capital Bank and the CFA Societies of Texas. We're here today to talk about the economic recovery of Texas in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. Our guest, who will be answering all the many questions you all were good enough to send in advance, and are welcome to continue to send questions on our Facebook Live feed throughout this hour, is Richard Fisher. He doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to provide one anyway. After a long business career, he entered public service as a deputy U.S. Trade representative, where he negotiated over 40 international trade agreements. He was later the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas from 2005 to 2015. He's now a senior advisor at Barclays, on the boards of PepsiCo, AT&T, Tenet Healthcare, and a senior contributing editor for CNBC. Most recently, he's been appointed to Governor Greg Abbott's strike force to reopen Texas. He's the chairman of Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson's Economic Recovery Task Force. And last year, he was inducted into the Texas Business Hall of Fame. An honor
I've ever done.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks again, Richard, for being here. We've got a lot of questions, a lot of great questions about how Texas is going to recover from this. And so let's get to it. Many of the questions focused obviously on what shape you think this recovery is going to take, how long this is going to take, and how Texas is poised or not poised to recover as well or better than the rest of the nation. I know you've said, I've heard you say that you expect this to be a U-shaped curve for the recovery. So how gradual a recovery are we expecting?
Well, first, let's put things in context here. This is a big place. We have almost 30 million people. We have a very large economy, and most people don't realize we produce more than South Korea, more than Mexico, more than Canada, more than Spain. I could walk you through the list of countries. We almost produce as much as Italy. And I think it's a very important starting point here. In addition, by the way, we are the fourth largest nation in oil production. We produce more than China, for example, only behind Saudi Arabia last year, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iraq. So this is a big country, a big state. I think it's important to keep that in perspective. We've also been the leading job creator in the United States. And as everybody knows who's a Texan, we've seen so many migration flows come to our state, seeking the economic conditions here, escaping the Northeast, across the West Coast, and certainly the Midwest. And then within the state, Dallas and Houston have been huge job creating machines, as well as the rest of the state as well. San Antonio, Austin's a great example. So within that context, it is a very difficult thing once you shut down an economy to pick it up again. And as you know, at the advice of many of us, although some, there's a lot of people advising the governor. I might add, by the way, I've never given a penny to the governor or any politician in the state of Texas. So I have no bias here, but it's going to take time. And this is a good experiment to watch for the rest of the nation. It's difficult. We're driven, as all the US economy is, by small and medium-sized businesses. They're the backbone of America. For the country as a whole, companies with less than 500 employees, most of which are much less than 500 employees, and I'll come to that in a minute, they produce 40% of the nation's output. They create 82% of the country's jobs, and they currently maintain 50%, half of the jobs in America. They're the ones that have been shut down most notably. So it's not the companies that trade in the stock exchange. These are women and men that build things from scratch. Later on, they may sell to the big companies and then rationalize and reduce their headcount. But this is where America gets its engine. And what we did is we shut down the whole US economy, including Texas. Well, when you shut down employment and unemployment goes up, and we're seeing the numbers now. We had 23 million new ongoing unemployment claims that were noted this morning. The data just came out in the country at large. Texas is the biggest part of that, or one of the biggest parts. Then you kill consumption. Consumption drives our economy. I spent 10 years going through every economic model known to mankind and womankind at the Fed. And it all came down to what I learned. I don't know if they teach it anymore in high school economics in 10th grade. C plus I plus G plus or minus X. Consumption, investment, government, and then net exports. Consumption is 70%. You don't have a job, you can't consume. So let me bring it down to Dallas as an example. Houston would be the same. San Antonio, Austin would be the same. In the city of Dallas, we have 1,030,000 people that go to work every day. They may not live here, they may come in to the city itself. But that's how many people work within the city of Dallas, within the zip codes that define the city of Dallas. 300,000 of them, so a third roughly, work for companies that have less than 25 employees. That's an astonishing statistic. And they have been furloughed and wiped off. These are restaurants and bars and little construction companies and little service companies and gardening companies and so on. They're the backbone of our economy. They're the backbone of the Houston economy. They're the backbone of the San Antonio economy and the Austin economy. And those people have been set back. They don't have working capital to run their little businesses. Some of them have been able to get into the payroll protection program that's passed by Congress. We know what happened there. The bigger and the stronger and the smarter and the best lawyer got access to that. So here's my short, as that long introduction, here's my answer. It's going to take time. And we see that here in our powerful state, the biggest job creating machine in the country in size. And if it's going to take us time, it's going to take the nation time. We're also a huge trading state. We're the biggest. We account for roughly 40% of all trade in the United States now because we have the border with Mexico, the U.S.'s largest trading partner. And Mexico's a mess. Under the new administration there and his autarkic, meaning he wants to depend more internally on than external affairs. They still are not letting the auto companies that bring stuff into Texas and also work with the Canadians open up because they're worried about the coronavirus. So I would say, short answer, a long U-shaped recovery.
Can you be
a
more
long
specific?
short answer?
How long is long?
Nobody knows. I mean, if you watch CNBC, et cetera, and you listen to all these analysts talking about corporate profits and so on, no one can estimate what their earnings are going to be. Nobody. So now companies have suspended what they call guidance. Well, if the big guys can't do it, it's hard for the medium-sized and little guys. Again, the women and men that run these little companies, but are the backbone, for them to guess about the future. So until that's restored, and when you think about it, we have to get people back into the workplace. They have to feel comfortable with our mass transit or just sitting in a space with other people. We put the fear of God into them, and it'll take a long time to overcome that. Then you have to reconfigure those spaces. And as you know, under Governor Abbott's guidelines, we opened up a corridor for the big urban areas like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, et cetera. 50% for the far rural areas, except for when they have a very high infection rate, like in Moore County, way up north. That is gradualism. And that tells you right there, there is step by step by step. And he's putting the pedal to the metal here compared to other states. New York is completely shut up. Boston, New Jersey, some of the Midwestern states. So I would say it's a long recovery. And the worst thing about making a decision for business is uncertainty. We don't know if this will come back. We're being guided by the best medical expertise you can get, particularly here in Texas, we can get our hands on. That's the governor's priority. It's the mayor of Dallas's priority, but it'll take a while. I can't give you a time frame. It's going to be slow and it'll be painful. And as it goes on, by the way, people that were holding on, remember that picture of the cat just holding on to that bar a long time ago? Many of them are going to slip, unfortunately. And we're in Dallas trying to figure out a way through the mayor's task force to think about what the new economy, the new normal will be, and help advise our little businesses, the small, medium-sized enterprises, on how to prepare for the future, in addition to just surviving the current fear that we have and the current virus that we're suffering from.
Well, what tools does a city like Dallas have to help ease this recovery as much as possible?
Well, there are several tools. There are different ways to give grants to small businesses. The city of Dallas has a small pool to do that. Our effort is totally a private effort. The mayor thought it up, Mayor Johnson, who's a bright young man, and I think just likes to think with fresh thoughts. He's turned it over to me to organize, and of course, being a good organizer, I turn it over to somebody else, the Dallas Citizens Council, and Fred Propal, who's the CEO of Beck, one of the big builders and logistics companies here. And we're just putting that all together now under Fred's leadership. But so you use a combination of private and public forces. We have a very active, and this is true for Houston and the other great cities of Texas as well. We have a very active Chamber of Commerce, regional chamber. All of us are trying to work together. My focus is just, and the mayor's focus obviously is on the city, and there's a reason for that. This is the core of North Texas. If Dallas doesn't do well, let's take an extreme hyperbolic case. If it becomes Cleveland or St. Louis, the whole area around us rots, and people won't want to come here. People have been coming here, companies have been relocating, et cetera. Same thing out in the woodlands outside of Houston. And, Austin's a huge hotspot for location. We've seen that particularly in the tech sector. So if the cities themselves go rotten or don't come out of this stronger, we're not going to attract more capital. We're not going to attract more job creating capital. So there are all kinds of things. And I do think I have to give credit to Mayor Johnson. He's been very creative here. He keeps thinking about this. But even in terms of asking a private task force like ours to figure out a way to get big businesses to advise small businesses on their accounting and how you access capital and the best way to get the working capital that they need to operate their business. This will take time, however, and I think that's important to understand.
Well, let's shift to talk about was possibly the second most frequently asked question was about the oil markets here in Texas. We saw this dramatic drop in oil prices,
right,
to scary levels. How long do you expect this situation to persist, and how will it affect the entirety of the Texas economy?
Well, again, we produce 5 million barrels a day. I mean, that puts us only behind 3 other nations. That's important to bear in mind. More than what China produces. That's a big number when you think about it. And of course, it all comes down to the Permian Basin. God gave Texas and America a gift, the Permian Basin. And then George P. Mitchell, outside of Houston, from Houston, encouragingly to me, by the way, he was over the age of 60 when he figured this out. But he's the one who did fracking, horizontal drilling, brought into the new technology. It's somewhat controversial, but you have to admit it's increased the production significantly, and we realize how rich the Permian is. Clearly, there is, when you cut off consumption, like I mentioned earlier, you put people at home. You cut off consumption. You take away the incentive to drive somewhere, or fly somewhere, or use energy to the degree you used it before. You have a shortfall in demand relative to supply. The world has a supply of about 100 million barrels a day, the entire globe. But we have dropped down to somewhere around, 70 in terms of demand. And therefore, with that gap, we've seen a plummeting in prices. And now part of the way is the way the financial markets work. And as you saw, we've had actually negative prices for a while. That's because people bid on things in a financial contract, don't expect to take physical delivery. And then they're stuck with it. They got to get rid of it. So they'll send it anywhere just to mitigate their losses. So I think we have a way to go here. Until demand picks up, there is going to be a gap between the supply, Texas's supply and the rest of the world's, and the demand for it. And the best way to, if you're a financial guy, the best way to look at it is to look at the day lease rates for these big ships that store them at sea. They're running about $150,000 a day just to be floating tanks. So that's a good way to watch the margin, what happens with those prices. But the other thing that happened here in the oil patch here, particularly with the independents, we saw a lot of New York private equity money come in. Now, the old rule of thumb in Texas is when New York money comes in, it's time to get out, because they're going to be hammered, because they don't understand it like our guys do. Well, the one thing they did do was, instead of just underwriting the drill mentality that a lot of our guys had and were very successful with, they said, wait a minute, you have to make a profit. You have to have positive cash flow. Somewhat shocking to some of the marginal, and particularly those that were still building their businesses. They weren't bad guys, they were just building their business. That in a way is going to be helpful now that we've had this crest fall in demand for our product in the energy sector. And I think better discipline was brought to force, and that should contain some of the damage. But those that are highly leveraged, those that don't have good access to good acreage in the Permian in particular, we're going to see some hemorrhaging here. And those that lend to them will also suffer. Leverage is great when the economy is growing, meaning you live off your borrowings and you always expect to make more than you have to pay back or pay down. When the economy crumbles, it works the other way and it becomes a death toll. So we're going to see some shakeout here. Obviously, Sylvester Turner down there in Houston is, and Houston has felt it immediately. West Texas is feeling it immediately. It's been tough on Houston. They've pared back on their city staff and so on. We're more fortunate up here in North Texas. We're not as directly impacted. One last statistic you have to bear in mind. Only 1% of Texas employment is in energy and mining. It's one thing I was surprised to find out when I came into the Federal Reserve. Same thing for agriculture. But it funds our university system. It has a lot of value added. It accounts for probably 15% of our economy overall. And those employees that have been laid off are suffering, but also the flywheel of profits that comes off of that and cash that benefits our system is also hemorrhaging right now. It's going to, again, that'll take time. We're already seeing energy prices futures come up a little bit. That's because people are starting to drive a little bit more around the country, the states that have opened up. I'm not sure we'll see aircraft take off more rapidly, more full for quite a while, but it just tells you that that is a bit of a relief, but also tells you how long it's going to take.
Another questions were about all these Texas cities have had these very hot real estate markets, especially from a residential and a commercial, both from a residential and a commercial perspective. So how do you see this affecting that? Are we going to see a slowing down there, a cooling there?
We went through in the 80s, right? You probably weren't born back then. But
is this the 80s again?
Deja vu all over again?
Yeah.
Well, I do think certain sectors will be suffering from that, again, depending on who's over leveraged, who's not. Whenever people say, where are you from? And when I'm up on Wall Street or in London, I say, I come from the land of Gerald Hines and Trammell Crow. And they were masters at build. They were brilliant real estate developers. Of course, they did a lot of it on leverage. And most real estate operators, including, by the way, the current president of the United States, you build until things fall over, money disappears because you're working off of leverage. And in a low interest rate environment like we've had for the last 10, 11, 12 years, it becomes a very attractive proposition. And that tells me that you probably have overbuilt relative to underlying demand to begin with. And now that demand and reconfiguration has to take place in these spaces for where you put people, and people are getting used to more e-commerce and working from home and using the e-world to communicate, we probably have overbuilt. We're very dynamic on that front in Texas. At the Federal Reserve, there is a measurement called CRE for the bank's commercial real estate exposure. And in the 11th Federal Reserve District, which I had the pleasure of leading for 10 years, by the way, it's 98% Texas. We had the most exposure to CRE in our bank's commercial real estate exposure. And I expect that to bite us a little bit here and will be more difficult, particularly less so in the housing space, more so in the grade B and even the grade A commercial properties, the large buildings that we've been building. And I would expect already you're beginning to see some acreage farmland, depending on who owned it, come onto the market at more decent prices than they were before. So ranch land will be affected, but importantly, I think it's really the big commercials or real estate centers because they have to be reconfigured. They have to put less people in that space for quite a while till they figure out a cure to this virus. These are all happy answers, by the way. This company is full of sunshine.
Well, this makes me circle back to, do you think that Texas is better positioned than the rest of the nation or worse off because of our, how heavily we are, uh, how heavily the oil industry is here, and how hot the real estate market has been in driving our economy?
Yeah, my comments on real estate would apply to the rest of the country.
Mm.
Woe to those that are building those huge skyscrapers in Manhattan, where there's incredibly dense population. Or if you go up to Barclays, I'm their senior advisor in New York, and we have floors where you have hundreds of people elbow to elbow with trading terminals.
Mm.
You can't space people like that anymore. So we have everything is relative. We have a much more attractive space. That's why we've been attracting more business headquarters in Austin and Dallas and Houston, all over the state, San Antonio, everywhere. And we've been leading the country in job creation until this thing hit. I don't expect that to change, relatively speaking. I mean, think of the people that work in that dense population of Manhattan. You get on what's called the PATH train. It's an underground train that leaves New Jersey. You come in from Connecticut, the tri-state area, or get on a subway once you get in Manhattan. Who's going to want to do that for quite some time until they feel secure? We don't have, I mean, we have DART here, Dallas have rapid transit. We have a rapid transit in Houston, but we don't have that population density in our transportation links and system. And I do think that's to our benefit. I actually would suggest this. If we handle this right, if the governor's initiatives and the city mayors and the counties and so on are good at bringing the economy back and thinking about positioning for the future, I believe we will come out a net beneficiary of this experience. We'll attract even more. Who's going to want to live in New York right now? I love the city, but who wants to be there? Who's going to want to live in Chicago and go back to Michigan? All these places that have very high debt. This has nothing to do, by the way, with what party is in charge. It's really pure economics. And unless we create an income tax here, we are an attractive place to be, particularly after President Trump and the Senate's tax package, the Congress's tax package went through and penalized the high tax areas in terms of deductibility. So yeah, I think we come out stronger. We just have to make sure we repair more quickly, and we repair in a way that acknowledges the new normal and the way the economy works.
Great.
That's the sunshine I wanted to pump. Okay?
we need more and more sunshine these days, don't we? What tools are left to the Fed to address this issue if the economy, especially if the economy continues to slide? And do you think, one question was, is there a line in the sand where it's not worth the benefit of each dollar of stimulus or other easing you do if we're going to have to pay it off down the road?
That's a great question. Well, I think you have to go back a little bit in history to when I was there. We had the crisis of 2008, 2009. We took enormous measures to safeguard the system. Everything failed, but these were all financial instruments and financial institutions. For example, on the simplest plane, the first money market fund established in the United States, so-called broke the buck. It failed, basically. We stepped in and made that market. Commercial paper, a basic instrument for banking, lending, we stepped in and made that market. The bond markets failed, et cetera, et cetera. But that was to prevent the hemorrhaging of what's called counterparty risk. No one trusted each other. So you couldn't do you couldn't sell something, they didn't expect you didn't expect them to be paid for what you sold, et cetera. We stepped in and made those markets. And then as part of that process, we took interest rates to zero. And we also did rounds of quantitative easing. I dissented on the third round, but I thought we were done. We'll see. History will provide a judgment there. As a result of that, the Congress of the United States, who gives the central bank, the Federal Reserve, its licenses, thank God it's not given by the president, any president, not just this one. The Congress gives the central bank the license. They give it the license because they realize they don't have the discipline to run monetary policy. They can't even create a budget, right? So in their wisdom, they created an independent central bank. And they took away, though, a lot of our powers after that. And they created a legislation called Dodd-Frank. There's a section of the Federal Reserve Act called Section 13.3, where they took away the special lending, the innovative things that we did. This time is different. Congress is begging the Fed to do more. They've restored some of its unusual lending capacity. And the standard central banking rule goes back to the ancient days of the Bank of England and the principles of central banking. In a crisis, you lend, as they used to say, to this man, every man, that man. That was before we used the term women in ancient parlance. And you open the floodgates, but you make sure that you're lending to a secure credit and will be paid back. The way this thing is structured now, the Treasury will absorb whatever losses are being channeled out by the central bank. We'll see if that works. And given the incentive Congress has given them to do special lending programs and back those lending programs, the balance sheet is expanding again. And just again, when I went into the Fed in 2005, our balance sheet was about 800 billion. It's now 6.7 trillion. We took it to a sizable amount. We tried to pare it back, but the markets rejected that. It's expanding again. I expect it to go to about 10 trillion. That's a big number. But there's a limit because I believe the Fed's the only adult left in the market. I don't believe there's much difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to spending money. Democrats enjoy it more probably, but they both do it, right? Mm-hmm. And we're under urgent, and we have a president that just wants to spend and spend and spend and run up deficits. So your question is there a limit? Most likely. Are we lucky right now? Yes, because interest rates are so low. And the reason they're low is not just because of the Fed. In fact, I would argue it's not because of the Fed. We don't have the power we used to have over what's called the yield curve, where interest rates are set. Mm-hmm. It's because the whole world wants to have dollars. We are, I like to say this, it's not a pretty phrase, but the US right now is the best looking horse in the glue factory of the global economy. And as long as that's the case, money's relative. There's a lot of money around the world. People don't want to be in the euro, the other big capital pool. And the others are too small. The Japanese yen, the Chinese renminbi, nobody wants to be there. It's a tiny little part of all transactions. The dollars participates in 80% of all the globe's transactions. People want to have dollars. They've been building their pipelines. They've been taking their surpluses, if they have them, and buying US treasuries for safety purposes. We are energy independent. We have other attributes that people find attractive relative to the rest of the world. So the Fed doesn't have to go too far. The problem is you drive interest rates down, congressmen, and senators, both parties say, and the President of the United States, current president, says, geez, the cost of carry for borrowing all this money has not gone up. We can borrow more. Mm-hmm. At some point that comes to a halt. And I don't know what the numbers are. But in theory, over time, if the economy picks back up, people start consuming more because they have jobs. There's a lot of money out there. It'll be chasing fewer and fewer cheap goods. You end up with inflationary pressures. I don't see that right away. Right now, we're battling deflation and an implosion of the economy. But as we recover, if they put too much money out there, we will have inflationary pressures. And that's not good for our economy.
So you're not afraid of the balance sheet going to $10 billion?
And trillion, my boy.
I'm sorry, trillion. Yeah.
You're living in the past.
Billions. I'm sorry. Misspoke. Yes.
I noticed even the show Billions now is decabillions. It came out on Sunday night. Great show, by the way. I want to see how cautious people are in the financial sector. But yeah, I don't like it, and I think it's hard for it to be pared back. But right now we have a national emergency. This is a war. This is a microbe war. I'm not saying someone's attacking. I'm just saying we're battling an enemy, and we're all doing it together. And the worst outcome would be to let the economy collapse and not have the financial wherewithal to recover. And that's what the Federal Reserve does. It provides the liquidity for the machine to work, the gas, as it were, the gasoline, to use a Texas analogy, for this machine to pump. But you have to have incentives, and we provide more incentives here in Texas than you do in some of the other states for people to take that money and make their businesses grow and hire more people and therefore drive up consumption and a good economy. That's the linkage right there.
So let's go to a question from someone on Facebook. How will the recent federal immigration restrictions impact Texas?
I have a emotional bias there because my parents were immigrants. And I know people look at me and think, oh, he's rich guy, went to Harvard, all that stuff. My father was a homeless man until he came to this country. He came here with nothing. And I believe in immigration, obviously, because I'm the child of immigrants. I'm a first generation, first to go to university in my family or college. So I do believe in immigration. I do think we need the creativity that's come from good immigrants and the hard labor that comes from good immigrants. Obviously, we can't let everybody in the world in. And I personally find the idea of a wall to be horrifying. But on the other hand, when people are flooding across the border, there has to be limits. So I understand the argument on both sides. The thing I don't like is we have the greatest university system in the world. So University of Texas, A&M, Rice, SMU, I could walk through the whole thing. And we bring foreign students in here, and for the longest time, they'd get their degrees, develop their intellectual capital. We wouldn't let them stay. We sent them home. It's like drilling a well, finding a huge find, a huge reservoir, bring it to the surface and giving it away rather than taking advantage of it and using it to our purpose. So I do think that we need immigration, and it's important to retool and bring things home and all that kind of stuff. But look at what happened. Silicon Valley was built by Russian immigrants. New York City was built by Italian immigrants who came in and built the subway system. We are so dependent on what comes in from Mexico and other countries. Look, by the way, Houston's the most diverse city in America for languages spoken and country backgrounds, more diverse than New York. So I do think we're benefits of immigration, and I think it's an important factor for us. But I'm biased.
Fair enough. Well, you brought up the education system. How do you anticipate higher education being affected by this?
Well, the private universities that are well endowed can turn to that endowment, but I doubt that endowment's going to easily be growing if people are financially insecure that I could give away more. But there'll be a fallout there. I worry about the historically Black schools and those that are not that well endowed. The University of Texas system, as you know, the wellhead tax supports our system here, and it's very important to Texas and A&M. That's a huge system. It has built a heck of an endowment. It rivals that of Harvard, for example, although it's spread over so many more people, more students and faculty and facilities. So yeah, I think it's a setback. And very importantly here, graduating seniors don't know where to go. Graduating business school graduates or others have no idea where to go here. They've been suspended. That is a big setback because these are the people that come in with new ideas, new brain power, propel the system forward. I'm really worried about this graduating class. When I graduated from Stanford Business School, we were in the Depression of 74, 75. And I remember I took a job only because they offered me a bonus. You know what the bonus was? $50 at the end of the year. But it helped in those days buy 10 meals. That was a hell of a deal. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was lucky too. A lot of my classmates got nothing. So yeah, I worry about financing our higher education system. I worry about how they're going to re-engage and come back. And I really worry about the current graduating class. And I feel sorry for them. It's going to be tough. They're going to be out there dangling for a while. And I hope businesses will reach down and bring them up, even if it's only for internships or low pay, like I received.
Mm. And how that graduating class is affected will have ripple effects on the rest of our economy, right?
Yeah, this is fresh blood, fresh brain power, fresh workers. So, and then, who do we take in anew? This is one of the things going on in the university system all over the country. Do you encourage gap years, or are you going to actually re-engage? Who wants to go to college unless you have to, through the internet? You want to be able to have a cup of coffee with your classmates or with a teaching fellow or professor. So yeah, that system is going to be challenged, and also the structure of classrooms is going to be challenged. Mm. I lecture twice a year at the Macomb School. It's usually a joint business school and law school class that Bill Cunningham, Professor Cunningham, former President Cunningham, former everything Cunningham pulls together. And it's a huge classroom with tiered seating and they're elbow to elbow. I've been trying to think, what would it look like now? And actually, the last lecture I gave during the crisis here was all done by video, including the students. It just doesn't have the same chemistry. It's not quite the same. And we're going to have to figure out a way to reconfigure our education system as well. And that goes all the way down to our high schools and our primary schools. And as you know, our public education system in Texas is not good in the independent school districts. It's not good anywhere in America. We need to up that game to compete with China. And I hope Texas can do a better job than the rest of the country.
And this, this crisis, even though we're here talking about these obviously significant economic impacts, is primarily a healthcare crisis. It's primarily a medical care crisis. It's straining our system, and Texas has this very high uninsured rate,
Right.
which obviously people are losing their jobs, they're losing their health insurance. We're only adding to that problem. How big a drag on Texas's recovery is that uninsured rate?
Well, it is a drag. I mean, we also have, by the way, the greatest medical complexes, amongst the greatest medical complexes in the country.
Sure, but if people can't pay for the care, there's a problem.
Absolutely, and I'm on the board of a for-profit tenant healthcare. It's one of the largest hospital systems in the country. There's only so much you can do pro bono. You can't, and then we have, of course, the endowed public hospital system, whether it's Baylor or whether it's part of the University of Texas or whether it's Southwestern Medical, et cetera. And we have to have a way to at least recover costs in those systems. But you're absolutely right. This is what's horrible. We brought all these people back into the workforce. We created, as the president likes to say, and over and over again loves to say, really the greatest economy ever, because we brought unemployment down in every possible sector. Didn't matter what your color your skin was or what your faith was or anything else. And now we've yanked we gave people dignity. A job gives you dignity. No one wants to be on welfare. They may have to be, but if you have a job, you feel like you become somebody. And now this virus has yanked the rug out from underneath these people. They need support. And the question is, again, how far do you go in providing that support? But it also tells you it takes a long time to restore their earning power and their dignity, which is why I think we'll have a U-shaped recovery. Come back to the first question you asked me.
Yeah.
It's very hard if you're uninsured. It's even doubly hard if you're uninsured, or triply hard.
And especially so in Texas when we have so many uninsured to start with.
Yeah, it's a rough place.
So we have a question from Facebook. Kellyanne is asking, obviously we're Americans, so we're focused on America and America's recovery. But how are our trading partners like Mexico, who have much smaller economies, how are they going to dig themselves out of this?
Yeah, Kellyanne, that's a great question, particularly in the case of Mexico, because we have an unusual president there now. He is what economists would call an autarkist. He believes in what's called autarky, which is almost take beyond what we're often talk about here under our current leadership. He wants Mexico to be more independent internally. And he has not been the best friend to the kind of businesses, particularly in Monterrey and elsewhere, that have blossomed because of the best parts of NAFTA. I implemented NAFTA for President Clinton for 4 years, so I'm, again, a little biased there. But the Mexican economy was a huge beneficiary. And he's sort of clamping down on that, point number one. You can't make decisions under this president very easily. He's really hard to figure out. And then the second thing is that they're also being hit by the coronavirus. For example, there's a big piece in the recent press, I think it was the Wall Street Journal or Dallas Morning News or Houston paper, I can't remember, but how the health authorities are not letting the auto parts and production facilities in northern Mexico reopen. We depend on that. Canada, it's a tripartite agreement. So I do worry about Mexico. And I consider, because I was raised there, by the way, I consider it part of North America. That's the North American Treaty. That's what NAFTA, whether it's in the current new formation or the old one, is all about. And I do not want to see an unstable Mexico south of my border, just like Europeans don't want to see an unstable, volatile Turkey on their southern border. So fingers crossed, but I do think they're going through a really difficult period right now. The economy is slumping. The Central Bank of Mexico, which is very well managed, has kept inflation from rearing its ugly head, and at the same time are financing this economy. They're doing a good job, but Mexico's hemorrhaging right now. And you see it in terms of the currency, it's depreciated significantly. I worry about Mexico. It's a great question. Our other trading partners are not as large. Canada is very vital to the United States and to Texas. They also invest a great deal of money here. They've also slowed down. So this trading influence, and again, we are 40% of the nation's export trade is right here in this state, is going to be another weak variable for us. It just means it'll take longer to recover. If there's one, let's see, 2 words you need to remember from today: U-shaped.
U-shaped. U-shaped. Okay.
1 letter and a word.
Another question from Nirev. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Once we're post-COVID, what are the factors that will remain that will prevent us from a more immediate recovery? Why does it have to be a U-shaped curve recovery?
Well, the shape refers to the immediacy of pulling out.
Yes.
A V shape would mean you go down, you come right back up. I don't think that's the case.
So what are the factors that keep us from doing that?
The factors are a reluctance of people to get into large density environments, a factory floor, a restaurant, a bar. My father's an Aussie, so I do like bars, and I hate to see them. I was a bartender out of college, and I hate to see them close down. But or you think of a workplace, or if you do take mass transportation, there's going to be a reluctance to do that. So that's an inhibitor. Now, what comes out of this that's positive is interesting. And if you're looking, as we are here in Dallas, to try to get our smaller and independent businesses positioned for the future, one of the things you have to look at is the e-world and how it's changing consumption patterns. And I've heard some good thinkers say this has accelerated that transition by 5 years in just a couple of months. People are used to communicating from home, those that have the capacity to do so, and we have more and more people able to do so. They're changing the way food is ordered and delivered or received, and also the way they get their products, including toilet paper, which we ran out of apparently for a long time, but not as severe as other countries have. So the way we provide the supply chains for our consumption in our households, the way we consume, this is being rapidly transformed, and you form habits after you've been doing something for a while. The longer this takes, the more those habits will take root. And I think that can be both good and bad. If we can develop for the state as a whole, or for the country as a whole, very rapid interaction through what's known as 5G, the 5th generation of internet development, which AT&T, a company I'm on the board of, and Verizon, and everybody else is working very hard to do, if only to catch up with the Chinese who are ahead of us. That will lead to better use of artificial intelligence, from the way you receive GPS signals for accuracy, to the way medical equipment is operated, to the way you order things online, the way cars are operated, et cetera. And I think this will all be part of the new normal. It's been accelerated here, and people are learning how to use, just as we're using this medium here, to communicate with a bigger audience than we could probably have in one room. So that's the good that may come out. It's also maybe the bad, because people that cannot adjust. Think of someone who lives in the poor parts of South Dallas. They don't have fancy cell phones. They cannot get on Zoom. They don't have access to the computer systems and the e-world that many of us do. That's part of what we're hoping. We haven't figured out the answer yet, to help assist in positioning Dallas for the new normal as we come out of this. As we flatten out what I call the mortality curve of businesses and employers in Texas. That's step one. But the real step that's required, positioning our state, our workers, our people for the future. That will not be easy to do, and we're going to have to put a lot of money behind it.
So,
sorry for the noise outside here. You probably can hear a ubiquitous leaf blower in Texas.
No worries.
Here's a an inside tip for everybody listening. You want to become a billionaire, invent the silent leaf blower. Well, in any community in our state.
That's $1 million. Yeah, you're right. That's a great idea.
$1 trillion idea.
$1 trillion idea. Yeah. So the idea of the U-shaped curve, this slow recovery with all these factors, though, and I know most public health experts are saying they expect a vaccine to take 12 to 18 months at least, longer as well. If by some miracle a vaccine comes sooner,
yep.
could we recover sooner?
Yeah, that would shorten it. It all comes down to being confident. Are you confident to go outside? Are you confident to be close to people? Are you confident to operate a machine? Are you confident to walk into a grocery store and pull something off the shelf? Mm. So are you confident sitting elbow to elbow in a bar again? I like bars. I'll keep coming back to bars. But if you feel that you have been inoculated against something, and you're going to have more confidence to go out in public, more confidence to consume. People that you had jobs with will be more confident to bring you back. You'll have more money in cost of transom. You'll be able to save some more, provide for your family, and consume. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a huge step forward.
Kathy on Facebook would like to know, what would you recommend we all do with our stimulus checks?
It depends on your circumstances. Seriously, obviously take care of your loved ones first. If there's not enough there to really save, you have to be prudent. Cut back on frivolous expenses. Anybody could tell you this. You don't need me to tell you that. But I do think look at it if you can afford to. Because so many folks, this isn't a whole lot, but as a bridge to come to where you need to be next, which is obviously getting a job or being in a position where you can take care of those you care about. So think of it that way, which means you don't go out and just buy a big screen TV or whatever that could be. I don't think they cost much anymore, by the way.
Yeah, I think they're much cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the idea of the silent leaf blower to not interrupt Zoom calls. Other than that, what other new industries would you foresee emerging from this crisis?
The food delivery system has just expanded dramatically. And, I do think too, there's a way for small businesses to get the scale they need to operate profitably, pay their bills, and make money for their owners, the women and men that build these things, by using e-commerce and getting the word out. My son has a little coffee company. Unfortunately for us, they're not located here. They're out in California. He crowdsourced the beginning of that thing. It's growing like topsy, and it delivers fresh ground coffee to your doorstep every week, ground to your liking, etc. But he built it from nothing, and but he's adapted it. He never has taken to the supermarket channels, et cetera. He did it all through social communication, all through the net. It's a little company called Bixby Coffee, Bixby. He's a former movie actor, so he's entertaining and he's funny. But it's all been done through social media, and he built a great little business. Actually, it's become a decent middle-sized business through social media. So I think, again, harnessing the e-world is going to be important, and it's developed so quickly. And look at some of these influencers and how the scale that they get. I don't understand most of them, but they do influence consumption patterns. I would be taking advantage of the new delivery systems and the new scale one can get through the modern communications and not be stuck in the past. I think that's the main thing. That's something that just locally here, Mayor Johnson and Fred Perpal and the Citizens Council, who again, in my great management style, I've turned things over to actually make this thing that the mayor gave me, important project work. Everybody understands. The mayor was the first to say that. We have to think about where we want to be. Think of this as a bridge period to the future. What's the future? And how do our people work in the future and deliver and create jobs in the future and get paid in the future? What structure do we need to help, particularly the backbone, which are small, medium-sized businesses?
Um, the healthcare crisis that has exposed the lack of the PPE for the healthcare workers has
Right.
exposed these global supply chains that we count on to provide this kind of material to the United States, and then we don't make it here. So do you think
China,
that?
China. Go ahead.
Yes. So do you think, and this is a question from Dylan, do you think Texas or the US should pursue domestic manufacturing more aggressively coming out of this when we see how much of what we count on is made elsewhere in the world?
Yeah. Well, this is called diversifying your supply chain. And this was already taking place, by the way, vis-a-vis China, because they were becoming much more intrusive. You had to have a party official on every factory floor and every management meeting, every board meeting. Xi Jinping is a much more aggressive leader than they've had in recent history. And that was scaring people away. Plus, the cost of labor was going up pretty rapidly. So you were seeing diversity to other countries. Vietnam, for example, was the beneficiary. Mexico was the beneficiary. Some of the Southern European or Eastern European countries were the beneficiaries. And there has been this Make America Great Again, bring it back to us, et cetera. Again, putting in context, manufacturing in the United States is only 11% of our economy. So much was globalized. And obviously, if you want to secure, particularly for sensitive products, you want to be able to make sure that if the supply chain is closed down, as they have, particularly with our disputes with China and so on, then you don't want to be so dependent on them. You should diversify, including bringing some stuff back home. To me, that's common sense.
Mm.
On the other hand, one of the things I hope people will applaud, not just the governor here, but one person, Michael Dell, for example, we had a shortage of masks here. Well, he turned over his supply chain management team to this task force the governor's put together, the strike force, and his effort. And within a week or two, we had 7 million masks, because that private enterprise approach to supply chains was brought to the public sector, and it was much more efficient than government bureaucracy can do, in my view. And, just a little note of thanks to Michael Dell and his team for making this possible. Again, we need more. I'm on the board of Tenet Healthcare. We need hospital gowns and N95 masks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it would be nice, but you've seen how many U.S. companies have turned their manufacturing facilities over to at least hand sanitizers and things like that. One thing that many are worried about is, will there be lawsuits that claim that they didn't work? We'll see. I think the plaintiffs' bar is getting pretty excited here, and that'll be an interesting test to see whether we see this in the U.S. Senate, but at the state level, having made a lot of progress on tort reform, now the trial bar did not like that, but it did give us an extra boost in terms of companies wanting to come here and practice in Texas. If we can indeed get some reasonable measurement of legal liability management here with all the new products that people are trying to bring home and manufacture here, some of which won't work, as long as they don't create harm. But we need to, I think that's a very good question that was asked there. So diversify your supply chain, keep it closer to home. It doesn't have to necessarily be at home, but I would have more at home given what we've learned, particularly for very sensitive areas like medical treatment and protection.
Hmm. Another question from Dylan. Do you foresee the 10-year interest rates negative, and what are the implications of negative interest rate?
Yeah, no, I don't. And the implications are bad. No, I'm serious. First of all, we had the 10-year, so this may get a little wonky here, but at the beginning of March, the 10-year Treasury, which is the key marker bond in the world, all markets are priced off the 10-year Treasury of basically speaking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the short-term LIBOR measurement, but in the big markets, the 10-year Treasury is the key bond. That interest rate got to below 30 basis points, so less than 0.31 of 1% in March. Just to give you a little historical context, which I like, that's the lowest interest rate for the key currency of the world, key bond, in 820 years. The first trading paper that ever came out, ever, in the history of the world that traded was issued by Venice and Genoa over 800 years ago. It was a 5-year trading note. Well, we've gone through different currencies, the British pound, the Dutch florin throughout history and all that kind of Spanish peseta. The dollar's the key. And that was unusual because what was happening then is the virus was just beginning to scare the heck out of people. We were just beginning to figure out what to do, close up our economies. And those that had the wherewithal, the big investors, rushed into US dollars and hoarded US treasuries. Now the rate has tripled that. It's still less than 1%. It's gone up to 60 some odd basis point, means 61 hundredths of 1%, almost 71 hundredths of 1%. And as the economy picks up slowly, however slowly, and it improves, then that rate will inch up quite a bit. People still want to be in dollars. They don't want to be in euros because the European Union has had negative interest rates for a long time here. They went way beyond what we did at the Federal Reserve, and it didn't work. Germany was on the verge of recession before the COVID virus hit, and that's the strongest economy in Europe, as was France. So I don't foresee negative interest rates here unless the markets get desperate, just like we saw a negative oil futures price in May when it came closer to being delivered. And people just had to get rid of it, so they paid people to take it away from them. If the markets create a negative interest rate regime, I can understand that. I doubt it. The Federal Reserve does not want to do what the European Central Bank did and the Japanese Central Bank did by going negative, because it doesn't work. It did not lift their economies, and in fact, it destroyed their banking systems. So I don't foresee negative interest rates.
Do you think this is from Bilal, do you think the healthcare industry will benefit from this crisis or suffer long-term?
Well, obviously it depends on how you define the healthcare industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough on hospitals. It's very tough on our people that are frontline. I'm not just speaking for Tenet or anybody else. I'm just saying these are nurses and doctors that go to work every day. It's hard on them. We've seen these horrible stories in the New York Times of nurses that commit suicide in New York and so on because of the pressures that are built upon them. Healthcare delivery systems, you can't really treat a lot of these patients through telemedicine. And I think it will change the structure of healthcare systems. You know, most hospitals don't have the ability to quarantine significant numbers of people that are affected by a virus where you have no idea how it's going to spread through the system. It requires special air treatment in rooms and special structures and special masks and all that kind of stuff, special equipment. So I would imagine the healthcare system will have to become more efficient. We're going to have to treat the people that are at the front line perhaps a little bit differently, maybe reward them differently, who knows? Certainly be mindful of the pressure they come under in an emergency. And if you really want me to scare the heck out of you, here comes.
Okay.
The one lesson we've learned here is how vulnerable we as a nation are to chemical and microbiotic warfare. I mean, here's a good example. I'm not saying that was the purpose or that's where the virus came from. But if I were a bad guy, if I were Vladimir Putin or even Xi Jinping or certainly our young, very handsome friend in North Korea, I would be thinking, or I would be asking someone to do a tabletop study. You know, how could we cripple the United States? For a while, we all thought, and we still think it could be cyber. But when you look at how we've had to literally put our economy in a coma, destroy livelihoods through destruction of jobs and consumption, if you really wanted to do damage, I would be doing some case studies here. I just want to lift your spirits, by the way.
Okay, I'm totally terrified. I'm terrified now.
But that's where the healthcare system comes in. I mean, we have to be prepared for these kind of emergencies, and yeah, we're going to have to be more adaptable.
Absolutely. Well, let's just finish with one last question. How different do you think the next decade will be for Texas compared to the decade we just came out of in the wake of all this?
Well, if we manage this opening up and positioning for the future better than other states, we'll be a beneficiary. Again, we saw business and the capital that finances business flood into the state. We've seen everybody from Charles Schwab relocate from the West Coast to the big companies coming down from the East Coast, McKesson, the big healthcare company, et cetera. We're seeing what happens in Austin. We're seeing every one of our major cities benefit from our relative attractiveness. And if we can maintain that attractiveness, if we can be a state where businesses can get their license and can move quickly and create jobs quickly and don't have to go through the onerous processes that you go through in California and the Midwest and New York, if we maintain an attractive place to do business coming out of this thing, and in fact show that we're positioning for the future, which we're trying to do here in this exercise here in the city of Dallas and elsewhere, then I think we come out a beneficiary. I can't tell you how many of my, right after the tax bill was passed, and remember, it limited deductibility in the very high income tax states, New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, everybody got all ticked off. I went to meet with a bunch of the big hedge fund managers in Connecticut. They had asked for some advice on interest rate futures and all that kind of stuff that I do. And so I prepare for these meetings. These were big investors. And in every one of them, I sat down and the first question was, what's it like living in Texas? I said, well, you know, we have automobiles, we have the internet, we have air conditioning. So, like I'd come from some foreign land, and you know what was top foremost in our minds, how do I move out of here? And we've seen a lot of people come down here. So we are relatively attractive. Whatever we do to get out of this, we have to maintain our relative attractiveness. I want Texas, just to kill that analogy I gave you, I don't just want to be the best looking horse at glue factory. I want to be Secretariat at Belmont in 1972 who won by 30 lengths. And I think we have that capacity, and I hope we get it done.
Great. Well, Mr. Fisher, thank you so much for your time. And then thanks again.
I even put on a coat and a shirt for you guys.
Oh, yeah.
We're common bottoms now.
Thank you so much for that.
By the way, the coat and tie industry, I think, that's a permanent setback. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to the Texas Business Hall of Fame for hosting this, and the sponsors, Texas Capital Bank and the CFA Societies for Texas. This has been a great event, great conversation. Thank you all for your questions. And we'll talk to you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Adios.